Guatemala Global, the daily vlogcast in English. This is episode 4, and I have the great pleasure to interview Ron Bryant, who has been a lifelong developer and kind of a sciencey guy and very creative guy. Who's kind of just been curious about life, and I've had the pleasure to talk to him before personally, and I've always been at awe of his experience and insight over technology, especially computers and code, and then the internet, and maybe what the present and the future holds. So thank you, Ron, for being here. Welcome.
My pleasure.
Tell me, tell me a little bit first. What do you think? How are you guys doing in general over in Oregon? How is the pandemic happening over there? What's your experience of it?
Well, I think we're more lucky than most states because, for being a West Coast state, with a dense population, we're not suffering as bad as California or Washington, which are our adjacent West Coast states. I think we've had less than 200 deaths for large population, so we've been very lucky.
I think that. Do you think that's attributable also to the general Oregonian conscientiousness? Like Oregonians seem to be more conscientious about these things sometimes. Do you think that helped?
No, actually, I think we've just been very.
Oh no.
My wife and I, we do wear masks. We try to shelter in place as much as possible. But when we do go out, we don't see very many people wearing masks. And I actually feel funny wearing a mask because it seems like I'm the only one wearing a mask. There's a few pandemic deniers around, thinking this is nonsense.
This is one of the things I'd like to eventually reach in our conversation if we have the time, which is so much information and moving around. Just from a general perspective, this it is a problem. There's a guy. Craig. I think it's Craig, the guy from Craigslist. I forget his last name, but the last project he's been working on was finding ways of guaranteeing news sources. As a way to control these things like fake news or pandemic deniers or other crazy ideas that seem to group together online and then manifest. So I'd like to start with your life. Where were you born, and where did this passion for technology come from? And let's start from there. Let's see where this goes.
Well, I born in Arizona, not too far from Grand Canyon, and my father was a farmer, a rancher, one of the cowboys, and we migrated from Arizona to California, and probably in the mid-50s we moved to Oregon, and I think first encounter with technology was when my father bought a television set with two model television set, and it only worked for a few months. It quit working.
Oh
And
no!
my father was enough of that. Enough with
So
just move the TV to the back porch.
how old were you when that happened with the TV?
12, I think.
Okay, and yeah, that's a very impressionable age. And I remember my first computer. I was somewhere around there. It was a very rare thing too back in my time.
But that TV, I asked my father, "Can I have it?" Experiment with it. Why don't he didn't care. And so I took the back off of it, and I looked inside, and I saw a half dozen tubes. They were all glowing red, but one of them had a blue. So I thought, well, that's different. That tube is different from the rest of it. So I took my bicycle, rode it down to the grocery store. Back in those days, you could just take a tube into a grocery store, and they had a tube there.
Oh
We
wow!
had
It was a were tubes like a very it was a very general sense of technology. I guess the stores or hardware stores. There wasn't
oh,
technology stores.
grocery store. Yeah, it was actually in the corner of a grocery store, and so I got a new tube in there, and the TV worked fine. I just kind of kept it to a secret and moved that TV to my room. Just had it,
Oh,
you know,
so
made it my own.
you fixed the TV and you didn't tell anybody.
Correct.
Okay, well, you found out the advantages of technology very early too. Then, in a
Well,
way.
then it led me to experiment with antennas and understanding all signals. And thinking a lot of my understanding of RF technologies started from those days, understanding about quarter wavelengths. I got books from school to help me better understand antennas, anything like how to use them, how to manufacture them. This is again at age 12.
Yeah, it's super early. Now, what I think one thing that happens at age 12 is that you have no biases. You know,
True.
so and also I think your empiric learning molds your thinking. So when you see how something behaves without trying to understand the theory before that, your mind appreciates the phenomena differently. I don't know if you've seen you've understood something before you understood the theory, and then you had to conciliate between the both.
Right? Happens a lot.
Yeah,
One thing I tell my kids growing up and grandkids now is that, what those that you find interest out at a young age, that those are the things you'll be good at and enjoy as an adult. I strive to make them understand, till they're young, because time when you can learn so quickly.
I'm having a little trouble listening to you, but I think it's my signal. So I'm just switching. Um, I apologize, guys. This is a call between Guatemala and Oregon, so sometimes we have drop offs. There you are, Ron. Hi. I changed my Wi-Fi connection so I could have a better signal.
Uh, I'm currently, oh, I have, and terrestrial connection, so I'm not sure which one I should be using.
Okay, well, I think I can hear you well now. If it becomes a problem, we can figure it out. But you were saying so you fixed your own TV. The TV got broken. Your dad said enough of that. You found a way to fix it using pretty much logic. You found tubes. There was one broken. You replaced it, and it worked. And it was a huge impact because it opened up a world of creative solutions, right? Oh, and science.
True, it's true. The technique of the things that are different in a troubleshooting that been and has made me quite successful in the industry these years. Um, an example most recently, the last few, the plasma um, that have came into being, I somebody had asked me, could I look at their plasma TV that had failed, and I looked inside there. I looked at, just scanned it over with my eyes, and I looked at the capacitors on it. And I saw all the capacitors had flat top except for two. It was kind of a wrap up, different. So I went and replaced with caps for that if you do that. So listeners, take that in mind. Don't don't assume fixing anything. Don't know enough about it technologically speaking, but just look for obvious things that are different.
Okay, so there's an aspect of symmetry. I, I would like to go back to the connection. It's been really hard actually to understand. I've been hearing bits and pieces, and as a replay, uh, or actually, if I was wondering if you could try switching lines or switching if you had another Wi-Fi option,
Okay.
um, it might drop the connection, but it's. I think
Well,
she.
I'm still here.
Okay, cool. Um, how did the what was your next step? I mean, you graduated, and then did you start college? I and
I did. It was after high school. It was the more was and my. Can you hear me? Okay, Juanford?
a little bit. I think it's actually the signal could improve a lot if it were possible. It's a little difficult to understand. Right now, I can't hear anything. I don't know if you're speaking.
Okay, I switched completely to uh, cellular.
Oh, okay. I think that helps.
Hopefully that's
Yes, I think it. Well, let's try it. So you're telling me, you know, how does high school
okay.
move? You know,
Um,
how do you evolve? Do you go because I only have references of movies who are very nostalgic about the 70s and 80s and 60s, and especially about technology happening then. And I can imagine guys who friends who had this same inclination for science kind of feed give each other feedback and push each other to become more I don't know into technology in a sense.
True. But my first encounter with computers was in my senior year in high school, and I think it was the year 1969. And we had a teletype connected up to a Portland computer, and I had gone up to the console, just kind of snuck up there to experiment with it, and typed 2 plus 2 equals, and it told me 4. And to me, that
Wow.
was kind of amazing.
Well, yeah, yeah. I just like so it was a. This is fairly special, the fact that your first line of code worked. You got an output.
Got it, and it was correct output too. And so then I enlisted in the Air Force rather than being a grunt soldier, and ended up getting to go through radio school in the military, and
Wow.
ended up getting the extension into cryptography
Wow.
and using a cryptography computer. And we did encryption for jet fighters control. And after that, I finished my education at the University of Portland. Got a job as
What did
engineer at
you majored as a systems engineer, right? Or
it was a dual degree program, electrical engineer, mechanical engineer.
and computing wasn't like a it was a field of study, but it wasn't its own field of study yet, or was it? Coming
Correct,
at
it was not. Uh, no,
wow.
there was not no computer science degrees at that time. Well, not from the University of Portland. I think Stanford had one, but
Yeah, well, Stanford does a lot of research into computer. Is leading is pushing for that a lot. I think Stanford and radio too. There's a lot of um, there's a guy called Steve Blank. I don't know if you've read him or seen him, but he has a really great video on YouTube called "The Secret History of Silicon Valley," which talks about the history of radio
oh,
technology moving forward during the Second World War. It's really nice, really great stuff. Um, So okay, so, and so this is innovation. Did you have any idea how big this was going to be back in when you're working on this, finishing college, so to speak?
Well, I had taken a FCC license exam while I was in back in the States after in my last year of the military, and got an FCC license,
What is that? I'm
and it
sorry.
wasn't much longer. Federal Communications Commission, so I had the ability to run a radio station,
Oh,
to,
well,
to be the engineer at a radio station, so I understand about antennas and transmitters and all of that, and how video works. And when I went to work at Tech, it was in the computer graphics division. It was a new um, group just starting out. They were hiring up to ramp up with new projects. And I got a letter from the United States Congress asking me to testify before Congress about the future technologies of computers and communications,
what?
because I had that FCC license.
Oh,
Congress
so you.
tapped me to testify before Congress.
Oh, and you went to Congress then?
Well, they said you don't have to do it. You could fill out these forms. It was be like you fill out these questionnaires, and that stuff will be presented to Congress. So
And
it's a deposition, I think is what they call it.
do you
But I,
can you? Huh?
the only reason I tell you is because the ideas that I had to put on that paper at that time, I couldn't foresee all the things that have happened. That I knew that computers would be talking to each other, and people would be using those computers to play games. Because even at the time when I was doing that, I was writing games for computers. We were all doing that.
That's so cool.
And one of the first things I did was hook two of these computers together through an RS-232 communications cable, and made up my own protocol to allow these two computers to talk back and forth to dogfight with airplanes. And
Eh,
the same picture was being displayed on both screens, and but the pilots could fly the other plane on the other computer. You understand what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. This is these are. I mean, from game development perspective is very cool, but also the insight you need to have to create two perspectives interacting at the same time is awesome. It's
But
yeah.
it's the necessity of wanting to have fun. I think that entertainment is what drives technology. you know,
I agree. I
I've got to
agree.
say that's true. So many things we invent are just to have fun or to cure boredom. A lot of it is for other things, maybe for medicine or for to make your life easier. But a lot of it is strictly to have fun or to explore for adventures like our trips to the moon. You know, what did we really accomplish by that? It
Well,
was just something to do.
yeah. Well, it was certainly a very political thing at the time to get to the moon. It was a space race, as I understand it. But yeah, I agree that innovation. This is something I just recently read from Simon Sinek. Innovation is not efficient. It has to be entertaining. It has to be an end on itself. The exploration, the dopamine boost of knowing you've discovered something, and it really has. Because people, I think large organizations can pay for innovation in terms of research and development, which is something I want to ask you about later. Your experience in research and development, but actually, that's it. You really need to enjoy it to like it. It's art in a way. It is creativity, and it is stimulating uh, human parts of the human brain in a way that we are kind of becoming conditioned to become innovators. We're being rewarded with dopamine when we get things to work, which
Sure.
so okay. So what were the? Can you share the ideas of of what you thought the world would be in terms of innovation? What your general scope was in contrast to now that you sent to Congress?
Honestly, I don't really remember.
Okay, yeah, it was a while ago, I guess.
It's, yeah, it was a while ago, and I was completely wrong probably. Although, computers talking to each other, and I mean, we had a lot of that at the time because when the internet first started, there were like universities had their computers, and then you would dial into this computer, and the main computers would talk to each other. Like we had one that I think it was Portland State. Can't remember one of the colleges or universities in Portland, and it was the name of that computer was Rain. I always found that funny because Oregon is known for lots of rain. And Rain would talk to a computer via phone lines to California, to Caltech or whatever. And then there was other computers, in Chicago. So the internet then was very well known. Like when you talk to a computer there, or talk to some internet location uh, in California, you knew the exact path it was taking.
Yeah, yeah,
And we would go to Rain, then we would go to this other computer, right?
yeah. There was no TCP/IP yet. There wasn't a Oh,
But
it was.
now we don't see any of that. It's all with routers everywhere. It's all a mystery. So yep.
Wow. What years are these? And where you're not working at the station at the time.
I
When
got
you're
to
doing.
comment back about
Please do.
when I was talking about the moon race, space race. I'd gone to listen to Isaac Asimov in a speech, and this was again in the 60s and 70s. This was
You
when
listen. You mean you physically saw
people were
Isaac
worried about
Asimov?
spending so much money.
Sorry, just
Exactly, he was giving a speech at one of the universities.
that's so amazing. Like for me, that's so cool. Now I know somebody who's met Asimov in person. That's amazing for me. Sorry, I interrupted, and there's probably something more important that you have to say than my observations. Please go on.
Somebody had asked him, how can you justify spending all this money on space, on a trip to the moon? And Isaac answered that question. He says, so you don't understand. It's not like we took these millions of dollars and we buried it on the moon. We spent that money in developing technology. And to this day, I still remember him saying that because so many people don't understand, you know, when money's spent in certain ways like that, how it develops technologies, develops the sciences.
I mean, yes, the advent of the internet took millions and millions and millions of dollars and a lot of lobbying, and there had to be large masses of motivation. I think to move forward, and it takes big strategic thinkers to manage the equation of ROI, return on investment. And
Yep.
I think military use has been one of the biggest because it is the biggest competitive motivator, and the output of technology is exponential efficiency. I think that is what makes a technology stay. Maybe curiosity creates it, but what sticks.
You're definitely right about that because the biggest thing back then was DARPA, DARPANET, and ARPANET, and that's all military. And that really pushed the technology a lot.
What about the private sector? How I know you? How did you move? Or how did that move? I know you started working at Xerox, I think. Um, how
Yep,
how was
that
that move?
was my first company.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was the most exciting time to be in the pioneer's position with computer graphics because Tektronix at the time was one of the pioneers in that field, and every day was fun, just going to work. The systems we made were in such high demand. Our profit margins were just fantastic. So we really could write our own ticket on what we wanted to do. So every one of us engineers was just encouraged to just do, just be creative.
Wow.
And it's not like it was in these later years where it's just so competitive that it's to be a daily grind. Back then we had no competition. All we had was profit.
That's amazing. That's just crazy. What can you reference some of the technology that might have, you know, uh, started being used that you had a part to play in directly that became of
Um,
wide use?
uh, we started out. We bought our company, Tektronix, bought a calculator company, and that Scientific Calculators was the little company name. And so our objective was to take these calculators that would evaluate expressions and graph those functions on the screen. So we hook a graphics, because Tektronix was known as an oscilloscope company, which an oscilloscope is an XY display that would you could hook up and trace display electronic signals on the scope screen. Well, the idea was to replace those electronic signals that are coming from something that you're measuring and hook them up to a computer. And so that was the whole idea of, about that. And we with graph functions, and our militaries were military and auto industry was a big customer.
It was the first intense on big data, really having inputs of data inputs, basically, to generate, I guess, enable strategic planning. This is also happening amidst the revolution of total quality control and statistical quality control that's happening in Japan and with Toyota. That they're doing a lot of these data-driven administrative sciences that are also happening. I mean, or innovations in administrative science. Um,
True. That came a few years later. I remember when that passed through the industry too. Um,
it's such a shame that
the
you can say we were happy to go. We were really creative. We were just blowing everybody's minds with new stuff, and then the contrast with the current place where everybody's just stuck with a high demand for something that is technological, but there is no innovation now. Or if there is, well, there is actually. I think there's a ton of innovation, but but it uh, I don't know. I think there is a moment. There was a moment for creativity, and digital technology and computing to bloom, and it was then. Where do you think these
it was
news?
something
Uh-huh.
new, Manfred. It was something new because it's something new. Google in its early days was the place to be, and I remember I had the opportunity to work at Microsoft when Microsoft first started up, and we were working with the 8080 processor as well, and we developed a graphics computer using 8080 processor around the same time that Steve Jobs uh, and those folks were working on their little computer. And I remember we had to choose between digital research and Microsoft to be an operating system for our computer. And we had both Microsoft and digital research come in and talk to us about what they had to offer. And this was Microsoft probably had, I don't know, 25 to 50 employees at that time.
Wow. Uh huh.
And so digital research had a better package, much better than Microsoft. And they had better documentation, and it was just a better setup. But for whatever reason, Microsoft ended up winning in that game. And I think it was their marketing strategies. They were really hard drivers. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
but it
Mhm.
shows you just don't know.
Even with the names, you can see the priorities. Digital research seems a very thorough brief explanation of exactly what they do, a very logical approach. Whereas Microsoft seems marketing, markety. you know, um, it, I have a question. I remember at some point um, we discussed Unix. This is 10 years ago. But how what was your experience with Unix, and what was your perspective on it? And Wiz, I guess.
We we bought a we bought a VAX computer at the time. That was the thing. I think it was a VAX 1170, and we bought it to be able to learn about the operating system and computers and design attachments for it. And one of the Unix engineers from Berkeley came up to work in our little plant here in Oregon, and he was like an extended stay, and I stuck to him like glue at the time. And I remember this guy was kind of a long-haired hippie guy, and I was going to just learn everything he knew about Linux. And I don't remember his name to this day, but he was a real guru with building the OS, writing drivers, and all of that. And I think, oh, I think that's what he was actually brought him up to do, write a driver for one of our terminals, graphics terminals. So I stayed right with him, and he showed me how to regen the kernel on a Unix machine, how to write a driver, how to do all of this stuff. And back then it was, quite the chore. And if you weren't careful, you could crash the whole system. You could, what do they call it? Crater it, I think. And you just,
Crater it.
uh, if you didn't do the right thing, get it in a boot reloop. And um, so, yeah, that was my first experience with it. And I was amazed, just amazed with it.
As the years have evolved, I think Linux
My
and
wife
then.
asked,
Go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, my wife asked me who invented the mouse today. She said it was only one of her trivia questions, and so I had asked Alexa who invented the mouse, and she said Edgerton or something. I can't remember the guy's name, and I said, well, I thought Xerox invented the mouse because we ended up later bought by our little design group was bought by Xerox, and so we learned about Xerox, and it turned out that Xerox was the first one to implement it in a computer system that was the Xerox Alto computer system,
And then that moved, and then
which was uh,
hmm it was copied
which Alto
by
was
Apple.
a early Unix machine, if you will.
Oh, sorry, I didn't get that. So, wait, but what are you saying that your development team developed the mouse?
No, Xerox. I think Xerox Park. At the time, we weren't part of Xerox.
Oh,
I was
okay,
still with Tektronix.
okay,
And
okay.
then later, Xerox liked what we were doing in our little design group in Wilsonville. They bought us. I think it was 150 engineers they bought.
Was this normal or was this like crazy? Because now it's normal. Now it's it's news. There's web pages dedicated to who masses of human talent being shifted to powers. But back then, was this normal or?
Well, this was in 2000, so it's not ancient.
Okay.
So almost 20 years ago, so I guess it's kind of ancient.
Well, time is a very relative thing at technology because I think I think I am farther away from 10 years ago. I think that we're technologically so much far away from the 2000s than from the 80s. Between the 80s and 2000s, there's more technology is slower in innovation. So changes is there's less change between the 80s and 2000s than there is between 2000s and 2020. We're we're running
Yeah,
so much
and
faster now.
everyone notices too. Yeah, we are definitely an exponential curve toward technology development.
I,
So by the time you're my age, then things will be very different, I'm sure.
well, we could have just started up again, in a new virtual world or something. So many theories, but what will the world look like if the acceleration continues of technology? It's mind-boggling. You know, I hope. I
Do
think
you enjoy watching science fiction?
a lot. I enjoyed reading it, and at some point between college and after that, I let it go, sadly. But I was a big fan.
I,
Hmm. I am a big fan. Asimov, I want to learn a lot because of, and I've only went through Foundation, so first couple of novels, and I want to go through it again. I'm really curious. I think he's a I don't know whether a prophet or an oracle in terms of giving us an insight of what the world of technology as something that changes civilizations. But go ahead. I ran off with an idea here.
s- speaking of personalities, I don't know if I ever told you if I met Gene Roddenberry as a lover of science fiction. He was one of my, matter of fact, when I repaired that TV set, it was first airing of Star Trek was on, and I would stay up late on Thursday nights and watch episodes of Star Trek on that TV that no one knew about. So he was always my hero, and I met him uh, in Portland after a
Wow.
Star Trek convention, and I had asked him, "How did you get into writing science fiction?" He looked at me and he said, "A lot of people know this, but I was a pilot for Pan Am, and the plane I was flying and the plane crashed. All the passengers and crew died. I was the only survivor." And he says, "I decided I would do something different with my life." And to this day, I don't know if that's true or if he was just spinning his tail.
Oh, well, but I'm speechless. Because if you look at if yeah, if you look at what Star Trek predicted, I mean, there's something to be said about inspiration. Once you have an idea really far away in the future of technology, then your entire unconscious is going to try to resolve the problem of how to get there. I think that's what psycho-cybernetics explains, which is something I enjoy reading about. But how does somebody who was a pilot for Pan Am end up predicting a lot of the technology that is still yet to come now? Or even Jules Verne, he did he did predict a lot of stuff that when he wrote it was really far out and crazy, and right now it's common sense and physics. So, you know, what do you think made him see that? Do you think there's something else, like a sixth sense in terms of technology, or a source that we're just tapping into that we might have been um,
I think
oblivious
it's
to?
extrapolation,
Okay.
because you consider what we have right now and how things could be better, and you just, but that's can apply for a lot of things. But there are quite a few things that are quite off the wall uh, that have, that we have today.
So by extrapolation, you mean Jules Verne saw how a gun worked and said, "Oh, that's the way we're going to get to the moon. We're going to shoot ourselves there." Uh, you apply a phenomena into another situation, and then you have this mesh creates uh, reproduces a new idea from these old two ideas, almost like genetics.
Well, that's what, yeah, that's true. I remember we developed a product at Tektronix, a color printer, and we use crayon wax, if you will, to
That's so
make the
cool.
actual, rather than inkjet, it was crayon. And as a kid, we used to take crayons and shave them off with a knife onto a piece of paper, fold that piece of paper in half, and then put an iron on top of it and melt that wax. And when you open it back up, it was a fantastic picture of blended colors, spreading across the page.
Wow, I'm gonna
And
try that with my kids.
at the time, yeah, do it because it's a beautiful artwork. And we thought about that. Could we use that for any kind of make a print for color? All we got to do is figure out a way to melt the wax so that it's much like inkjet, and then just use something to spray it onto the paper, and then press the paper. So we come up with an offset printer that uses wax. So I think stuff that you've played with in the past is, or some experiment that you've done opens your mind to new technologies.
Yeah, I can relate. I remember. I mean, I never did a lot of physical engineering, but I lived in an agricultural college when I grew up, and there was a water duct, a small water duct that kind of drained water into the crops, and it passed behind my house. It was maybe a foot and a half deep and a foot and a half wide. And every so often, after rainy season, a water stream would pass on, and it was made from bricks. And one summer, with friends, we started seeing who could build the most supportive dike. Just little um, water. I think you call it dikes, water presses, or
Correct.
and of course, then we had to figure. As soon as you started pushing water back from a stream, you felt increased pressure, and then you started figuring out how you could put other rocks in certain positions, and then start growing a structure based on the pressure from the water. So you had water dynamics and tensions of that you later will try to understand via civil engineering and hydrodynamics and structural dynamics and structural sciences uh, or physics. You did everything you did was intuitive using the water and the pressures, and we developed some pretty complex structures because it was a competition amongst friends, and it was fun and it was creative. So back to that, back to just doing nothing, being creative with stuff. And it's so sad because I think that a lot of especially in Latin America, I am a very creative guy, and I've found very little places where this creativity is kind of funneled into something productive. Normally, it's just associated with somebody who's okay, cool. Sorry, the my connection to live YouTube got stuck for a couple of seconds, but we're still live and it's still working, so we're fine. So yeah, playtime is important.
I think
Playtime is super
playtime.
important.
One of the things, my oldest daughter lives in Germany, and her kids are going to the German schools, and I spent time with them at the German schools, and their play that they do in their schools is much different than ours. Or that they give the kids things that you would not see in schools in America, hammers and nails and saws at kindergarten age, at age 6 and 7. But these kids learn from these working with these tools and cause and effect. It's really important to learn it at those age.
Sorry, I coughed a bit. That do you know Jordan Peterson, the author? He writes a book called 12 Rules for Life, and
No.
uh, an interesting thinker of the times. Actually, he's uh, quite an interesting person. I'll send you a link after. But he writes these books, and there's one called "Children and Skateboards" or something like that. Don't let children ride skateboards, and he explains that the dangers the children have to manage when they're being audacious. Those times where they might break an ankle, or sometimes they do some fairly dangerous stuff. It's extremely important for their own self confidence and the own uh, uh, yeah, self confidence and whatever drives from there. Uh, so that's he dedicates a whole step to letting people try stuff that could be a little bit dangerous, which is I think what you're referring to to what France is doing in their educational process. They're giving a little more responsibility to kids, even though they're in playtime and being creative.
Exactly. But I think it's we build on those things we learn as children in playtime, the things we observe in nature and in the early days in school when the teachers are showing us things in science classes. I still remember the science classes and the things I would marvel at as a kid, and to this day they still help me in problem solving.
What are you doing right now? What is your creative persecution and curiosity taking you right now? Where is it taking you?
Uh,
If
well, I've picked up fishing. It's my new passion, and so I've developed different kinds of lures. Uh, I did a process to make a small fishing lure, and I wanted to have something that made me more competitive. There's a lot of competition with these guys that are when you fish for salmon, and it's good to eat as well.
Yeah, yeah, good
So
healthy omega 3.
I made these little propeller type lures, and I wanted to mass produce those, and so I got a machine called Cameo, if you've heard of it, and I used that to cut out these 5 mil mylar, and then I developed a fixture to allow me to bend those, and it's an elaborate process with the DORC to control temperature and a ATX power supply and quite the contraption here to help me form these. And then I use those on fishing, and I thought, well, I bet these would sell. I wonder how they would do. So I put those on eBay and sold probably $200 in a weekend on it.
In a
I was
weekend?
kind of surprised. Yeah, in a weekend. I spent the whole day on Monday shipping all this stuff out, and I haven't really gone back to it. The shipping was not much fun.
This is something that I am amazed by you and a few other people that I consider to be extremely creative and smart, which is they tap into these niches and find a business niche that, people who have been oriented to business, which is, start obsessing about and become a lifelong thing. And you kind of discovered that and said, okay, cool, but I'm going to move here now because I'm curious about this now. And I don't want it to turn into a job, you know? So
I don't want it to turn into a job, is correct.
that's amazing. But you're basically telling me that you got into fishing, you got curious about, you got competitive with the guys, and then you went back and innovated fishing and created a production plant, local production plant, which is, I'm kind of segueing into it because my next question is about the future and what you think about the future. And just to kind of put in some of my ideas, which are probably going to be enhanced a lot and enriched by you, or corrected, very likely. Um, I'm thinking a lot about a world where major world coordination is going to happen from small towns to small towns and from families to families. Like, I don't think there's going to be large infrastructure, but instead what you're going to have is you're going to fly around in drones. So roads are going to have a different priority, and you're going to have 3D printers and local industry in your house to kind of provide locally, because it's more efficient. I'm looking at efficiencies as the guidelines. So I'm thinking you creating a small production plant to produce these the bait, the lure, which you'll have to send me a picture of, please. Um, that kind of future is what I think is going to happen, especially now where we're facing some pretty daunting economic futures, I think, or at least changing. I think changes will happen, and I think we're going to adapt fast because technology is faster now than before. So, what do you think about the future after this, storm of crazy ideas I've kind of bombarded?
Well, robotics and artificial intelligence, those are two things that will definitely be in the future. I mean, you can see it even today. I mean, I ask my Alexa technical questions often during the day, you know, and sometimes I'm doing some math, and so I ask Alexa to do a complex calculation for me, and she gives me the correct answer, you know. It's like, who would have thunk it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, your friend from Star Trek thunk it. You know,
That's true.
so
That's right.
these are things that amaze me. Like the guys who created the Jetsons, and then the ideas that
Yeah.
molded the cities. I think also they were looking for efficiency as their roadmap. But cities in the air, little drones, a lot of stuff that I thought in the 90s were misplaced ideas of the future are now in the era of millennial inspiration becoming a thing. Robotics scare me, I think, because you know, all of innovation moves forward. Have you seen what what's the Massachusetts technology?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Um,
With
th-
the with
they're
the robots that are dancing, and jumping around, and just
extremely
what they
nimble.
can do. It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It's so yeah, that's amazing. What that's going to change? That's at some point there's going to be like two economies. I think there's going to be, which happened by the way. There's a there in talk about transpolating ideas or transposing ideas. Um, there's a concept in economy in Guatemala that says there's two economies. There's the economy, or something between two economies happened because of the large gap of acquisitive uh, power of acquisition that was between Mayan populations or local populations that have been mostly marginalized to a colonial society, and that right now we're just seeing the merge, and there's great stuff happening, but at some point before the merge happened, there was two economies. There was one that was called the economy of the cents, where everybody could survive on the minimum wage. But if you move that minimum wage to the context of the colonial society that were landowners mostly, given rights, well, it was you couldn't survive a day. So it was really like two dimensions. Now think about this. Think about two societies now. One living off assets that are robots doing everything for them, including agriculture, mass production, calculations, administrative work, back office work. Uh, they're going to have so much more efficiency that their scale of economics and purchases and sales, which is what we're seeing right now. We're seeing a top 1% just moving as fast as technology is away from a medium income kind of thing in the world. Um, and then there's going to be this population who can maybe buy a robot and sustain itself on a farm, um, and then move around what somebody can sell. But usually to survive in a society, you're being productive and you're selling your time to satisfy a need. And somebody else can create a robot. What's going to happen with the rest of humanity? It's going to create its own sense of economy. Or what do you think about that situation, futuristically speaking?
it's impossible to say, you know. But with this pandemic, you know, you have to factor in those random events. It's almost like almost like a game that's being played, and everybody's going on really good, and then somebody comes in and just slides their hand across the board and just knocks everybody around. And then we get up, and the technology changes at that point. I think if people are going to, they've learned a lot. I know we manufacturing it to offshore for so many years, and I watched it happen. And I think it's some that's going to start coming back. And so we're going to revamp our manufacturing sector in the United States for sure. And when that revamping occurs, I think it's going to be a lot more automation than we've had in the past. Because the reason we went offshore was the cost of labor. And people are just not going to work for low wages in the States. So the only way to really get around that is by automation.
I agree. I think that automation, robotics are the way, and but it's an innovation process on itself to be able to overcome cheap labor, overcome cheap human brains as a competition. So I think that a big lever that's going to be pulled geopolitically is to create these double economies and enable cheap labor elsewhere until AI kind of swipes its arm around and changes the entire board and singularity and these things. Um,
If if the society can solve the hunger problems in the world, through automation, so if we have better energy sources, so we don't have to use fossil fuel, possibly fusion reactions, um, and we solve this hunger problems, then we can have people can have a lot more leisure time. And I remember my father working, you know, so many hours a day, so many days a week. And over the years, the work week has gotten less and less and less. And I think that's going to continue to happen. We live a life better than my father lived, even though he worked all these hours and we worked less hours. So in the future, it makes sense if you just follow that logically. In the future, we're going to live a better life and actually work less hours.
I agree. I think at some point we might even not need to work.
True.
And then the next step is going to be play. It's going to be a big summer where competition is going to be more less based on survival and more based on these playtimes, which is something great to look forward to. A very optimistic outcome, I have to say. There are other scenarios, but I think it's a healthy one to focus on. Um,
Me too.
Ron, we're uh, we're nearly over our time right now, and I I am so happy and so humbled that you agreed to have this podcast. You're a real legend, and I hope I can have you back on the show.
It'll be
Um,
fun.
and if you there's going to be a few. I have a lot of friends in Guatemala who are in the technology and innovation area, and they mythify and mystify some of the people you talked about. You met in person, Isaac Asimov, the guy from Star Trek. Uh, who,
Not,
what can you? And for me, you're talking. You're saying, but I don't have any distinction between that and saying you saw Babe Ruth, and you talk to him. It's just a legend, and or it becomes that, especially in Guatemala, where the innovation thing is happening right now, and you see a lot of people getting empowered because they have creativity and knowledge, and that's putting them in a position that they couldn't have gotten there using traditional tools. It's just pushing people forward socially that weren't able to, and that's wonderful in Guatemala. It's creating change, and people are investing in being creative, and suddenly people are having intellectual conversations on the streets, which is a big shift, I think, from what was happening 50 years ago, where it was more political conversations. So, do you have any message for them? Uh,
just yeah, have fun and be creative. That's the thing. And spend time with your children. I think if for all the cool things that happened in my life, if I would look back, I would say I wish I would have spent more time with my children.
that's that's old. That's gold. That's gold. Thank you.
It was great talking with you.
You too, Ron. I hope you can join me some other time. I don't know if I've bored you enough that you'll say yes or not, but I'll try my chances soon.
It'd be my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Please send hi to everybody over there and stay safe.
You too. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Well, that was Ron Bryant, and I hope to have him soon for more conversations. It's been great, guys, and stay tuned for the Spanish version of Guatemala Global. Sandra Mendez, a poet, is going to be talking about her most recent poets in Spanish and the Spanish version of Guatemala Global.